Kaimere is a distant planet. It is defined by waves of life brought from Earth and set free to evolve independently in this new context. The indigenous life of the planet, swarms of microbes called magic by the people who live there, are what harvest Earth organisms and make copies on Kaimere. As the asteroid which concluded the Mesozoic never struck Kaimere, dinosaurs remain the dominant terrestrial megafauna.
10 million years ago, Kaimere was in a state of change. 2 million years prior, a land bridge to the enormous continent of Hyrule had formed in the north, prompting a faunal interchange. Most impactful of this new fauna was the armored titanosaurs, who spread rapidly throughout Nikar. There are some remains to suggest one or two species of sauropod were already present, likely relics that survived the dynastic extinction north of the equator then spread south. But these new titans had an eruption of success. Many theories have been proposed as to why they were so much more successful, but substantial armor to defend them in their most vulnerable first few months, when all these new and derived mammals were hunting them, probably was a deciding factor. Whatever the reason, these new sauropods outcompeted their already rare cousins and completely redefined the ecology of Nikar from one dominated by large mammals being reclaimed by the dinosaurs. The dense forests were made open by their movements and foraging, and many animals specialized to a closed ecosystem found the continent increasingly inhospitable. To make matters worse, the Silverback Mountains continued to rise, making central Nikar even more arid. It would not yet become a grass-dominated habitat for another 2 million years, but this process was underway. All this was steady change. The ecosystem was relatively stable, though the northbound approach of another continent formed the initial contact between Arvel and Nikar, prompting yet another interchange. The giant amphicyonids, large dromaeosaurids, and sebecids that appear to have dominated Nikar during the Warring Clades period were in decline. All were reliant on dense foliage for ambush cover, and that context was about to give way to open woods. Megaraptorids from Nikar were having some success, though noasaurs were the top predators, with burrowing, sprinting, and robust clades all present. Indeed, by this time, it appears noasaurs dominated most habitats in Nikar. However, a new group of predators from Arvel had just arrived and rapidly began to challenge the ceratosaurs. Styraconicid megaraptorans. Today, this clade is best known for their riverside and wetland fish specialists, but the clade was once far more diverse. Mesopredators, cursorial pursuit predators, and massive apex predators were once far more common. Several species made the crossing as Arvel and Nikar briefly connected in the north. This contact wouldn't last long, as the Picardio-Caline plate from the south pressed into Arvel and contributed to a rotation counterclockwise, but it lasted long enough that an interchange caused stress for habitats on both sides. To make matters worse, this altered wind and water currents, leaving too many regional extinctions. The known world seems to have gotten briefly and slightly cooler, which meant the cast of Nikar was hit harder by this exchange, as more temperate Arvela fauna found Nikar suddenly quite to their liking, while northern animals would find moving south into this new land unappealing. That said, this is when the Keratoderma titans moved to Arvel, which caused the same consequence in turnover that Nikar experienced 2 million years prior. The exact details and what was lost is not well understood. There are only a handful of pore formations dating to around this time, so there are numerous mysteries and gaps in our understanding. What is known is that sometime around 10 million years ago, there were enough extinctions on both continents that a harvest was triggered. The exact range is not known for any harvest, but the further back one looks in time, past the Pleistocene harvest especially, the less certain time and place becomes. It seems, based on a few specimens, southern Africa was a likely origin. As this would span flora and fauna that would translate both to the subtropical Nicar and temperate Arvel, this was a good point of collection and likely influenced the portal's decision. Part of the confusion comes from the fact that this is not a terribly well preserved or sampled time and place on Earth. Also, many animals presumably harvested at this time look quite similar to existing fauna already in Kaimere from Asia. 3 proboscideans are presumably taken from this time, 2 species of dinotheres, one large and one small, and the 4-tusked elephant Stegotetrabelodon. Stegotetrabelodon is not known from southern Africa or from this exact time, leading to some suggest the harvest spanned the entire continent and may have been slightly later, though it's possible the animal simply had a wider geographic and temporal range than their fossil record currently suggests. This was the breakout star of the proboscideans of this harvest, quickly spreading throughout the northern continent south of the equator. Its abundance is often a useful marker of this time period. It has been suggested that this animal be given its own genus to counter the messiness of its phylogeny, which some in the assembly now defer to, since this is not an actual animal that aligns with our fossil record and may only have convergent resemblance. Returning to the original name, Cephalophalanx, has been increasingly common. The large species of Dinotherium does not seem to have lasted long, likely because there was already an enormous species in the same genus, though it's possible they simply hybridized and contributed to the genome of this resident species. The smaller species, belonging to Prodinotherium, was much more successful, sharing forest niches with dominant gomphotheres and subordinate mastodonts. The Koga of Kairul is generally believed to descend from the giant Dinotherium harvested from Asia 12 million years ago, though some have argued the smaller Dinothere may have been more adaptable and mobile, perhaps more efficiently making the journey to Kairul, especially since it seems to have been especially abundant at this time. If this were the case, then the Koga might instead belong to this genus, or perhaps best to give it a distinct genus to resolve the issue. There are several other proboscidean remains not easily assigned to these or native species. A long curved tusk and possibly keratinized mandible may hint at a population of the Chuerolophodon being included in the harvest, though the fragmentary nature of these remains may instead belong to a native gomphothere or mastodont, as diagnostic elements are not known. Hyrax have also been traced to this harvest. Some were small, though a few larger animals were harvested and had a lot of initial success. There were other large herbivores that appear to have come from this harvest. Several rhinoceros species were present. The enormous skull of a presumed elasmothere in the vaults of the Great Library has been estimated to stand over 3 meters at the shoulder. It's possible this was an animal that evolved in Kaimere from an earlier harvest, though it shows up and seems abundant at this time. Either it's an animal we don't have yet in our own fossil record at the time, or is part of an adaptive radiation of native animals that were undertaken alongside this harvest. This sort of conundrum is part of what makes estimating the time, place, and span of harvest so difficult. Either way, as central Nicar was transitioning from a forest to a mosaic, grassland, and forested habitat, this enormous grazer was among the initial success stories. Giraffids are also known from this time. A civethere, the ancestor of Nicar's modern unicorn, is usually thought to arrive from this harvest, though it may instead be from an earlier Asian harvest. The mosaic forests were perfect for them, and they seem to have thrived. Earliest giraffe, or a similar animal, also appears in Nicar's fossil record at this time, and also made home in the mosaic forest and grasslands with large herds commonly found there. There are also several smaller species of this clade, though these remains are quite fragmentary and it's difficult to say if they are from a newly harvested animal or belonging to other giraffoids from the prior Asian harvest. Hogs and small hippos are also tentatively attributed to this harvest. Forest hogs are only known from scant remains, and while they don't seem to have displaced Asian cousins in the mosaic forests and wetlands, which tend to have better preservation, they do seem to be present in rainforests in some capacity. The Highland hippo of Arvel and Nikari dwarf hippo are both thought to be descended from small African hippopotamids. The niche of larger hippos was instead taken by the related anthracotheres, which were quite successful at this time. The apex predator of Africa at this time may have been the hyenodont Megistotherium. Its latest remains were dated to 12 million years ago. The remains from what may have been a large hyenodont have been uncovered in the western peninsula of Nikar. Either this is some late surviving Megistotherium, or it may have been hyenodonts that made the crossing from Kyrule and have otherwise evaded detection. Neither would be terribly surprising, given the nature of the fossil record having so many gaps, but there does seem to have been a presence of these animals in Nikar, whatever their origin. They are also found in Arvel, competing with the resident amphicyonids, which seem to have generally held on amidst this new competition. The other large predator of Nikar was a large amphicyonid. These were already dominant predators in the known world for 4 million years, so again it's difficult to say if they were new or native. They seem to have had a resurgence in the forest of Nikar at this time, so if they weren't harvested, the clade's indigenous population had a dramatic recovery. There was also the nimravids, giant civets, and small hyenas. A hyena that might belong to the genus Percrocuta shows up in the mosaic of central Nikar. It appears to be the common ancestor of the striped, brown, and spotted hyenas of Earth. This was among the most successful predators in the 50 to 100 kilo size range, and rapidly overtook the grasslands, spreading north. When the next land bridge formed to Kyrule 8 million years ago, they crossed and thrived there. Upon their return, 250,000 years ago, the common hyena once more became among the most successful predators at around 100 kilos in Kaimere. Monkeys at this time appear to have generally had minimal impact. Most known world primate material prior to this harvest were New World monkeys with a few gibbons, Old World monkeys, and native adapiforms rounding out the cast. There aren't any known African monkeys from this harvest that lasted long, although if they were in the rainforest, it's unsurprising that they have yet to be found. That said, our own ancestors were included in this harvest. An abundance of small apes were brought to Kaimere and thrived in the prior harvest from Asia, but these African apes were larger. Nacaropithecus is a widespread and quite successful genus that erupted at this time. They are believed to be close relative of the common ancestor of gorillas, chimpanzees, and humans. While animals like this are only known from fragmentary remains on Earth, this is among the most well-known fossil ape in Kaimere's prehistory. This animal would go on to become the most abundant and successful ape lineage in Nikar throughout the Anchored period. One genus, Pseudopithecus, was even bipedal and traveled the grasslands that expanded during the Anchored period. The largest of this lineage, Melosteopithecus shackletensis, was around the size of a gorilla. While these apes were especially successful through the Anchored period, it appears they are extinct in modern times, at least in the known world, with their niche being overtaken by the giant gibbons, which have become far more successful in Arvel, even down into Picardia. It is presumed that numerous smaller fauna came to Kaimere at this time. Some, like the elephant shrews, can be confidently attributed to this harvest, though for most, it's difficult to say that they may have arrived from this harvest. Many, like the tigerfish and lungfish, are thought to have been harvested at this time. Birds taken at this time are especially difficult to assign, as many almost certainly hybridized with relatives, and their flight allows them to rapidly disperse beyond reliable estimates of when and where harvests take place. This is just a general issue with assigning when exactly flying birds were harvested. The tree asps are likely descended from this harvest as well. The African monitors, ancestral to the subgenus Allorinus that we met in the last episode, are another small animal confidently assumed to come from this harvest, though no fossils have been found in this lineage until well into the Anchored period, so it is somewhat of a ghost lineage. So far, no smoking gun specimens have placed this harvest with much precision in time and place. Most harvests are a bit of a puzzle, but this one more so than others. For all the initial success many flora and fauna seem to have had from this harvest, it is among the least impactful of Cenozoic harvests. The Moduru, common hyena, great pouncer, dwarf hippos, the Nakari unicorn, tree asps, and a few fish, rodents, and birds are the only animals in the known world that can be said to descend from this harvest with any confidence. It seems that while many had initial success, a lot of them went extinct fairly quickly. The four-tusked elephant cephalophalanx, for example, had herds dominating the mosaic forests and grasslands for around 2 million years, but their decline was swift, and they are not found past 8 million years ago. It is not known why they went extinct, though the arrival of the first large robust monarchs from Arvel 8 million years ago, replacing most of the starachonichids and noasaurs in the wake of drastic climate change, likely wasn't a coincidence. This new predator, coupled with an increasingly cool and arid climate, hit a lot of the native fauna quite hard. Giant hyenodonts, the last great cebechids, most amphicyonids, many giraffes, anthracotheres, and proboscideans went endangered or extinct. This calamity would go on to trigger another harvest 8 million years ago, which only worsened the conditions of these struggling fauna with an abundance of fresh competition from a similarly cool and arid part of our world, but that's a story for another time. Cheers to Ian for sponsoring this episode. While this harvest wasn't the source of a lot of modern fauna, it is quite illustrative of a lot of the uncertainty harvests this far back have. It also demonstrates that while conditions often benefit newly harvested animals because they come from regions chosen for their resemblance to the territory that the portal takes in times of strife, there's nothing special about these animals. Nothing that makes them confident in endurance. The same phenomenon that gives them a leg up when coming into this world also cripples them in the face of the next wave. For around 2 million years, fauna from southern Africa defined a majority of megafauna in the fossil record. However, when the context changed and new animals were brought that better fit this new climate, the trends of faunal turnover in the portal's territory turned against them just as easily as it paved the way for their initial success. Thanks again to Ian, to my Patreon patrons for your support, and thank you for watching. Cheers, folks!